Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for attending my presentation. My name is Kevin Ryan. I'm with the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation, and together today we are going to explore how your seafood is being caught, what species are being targeted, where they're being harvested from, and their economic value. The pictures throughout this presentation, unless otherwise cited, are pictures that I've taken or experiences that I have personally been a part of. This background picture is from the pilot house of my personal boat on the way back from a fishing trip this past summer. So the information contained in this presentation is accurate as of January 28th of this year, preliminary for the 2025 fishing season, and has not yet been finalized with the Atlantic Coastal Cooperative Statistics Program. All the data reported throughout the presentation are from state and federal fishing trips that were landed in New York. So just to summarize, in 2025, there were 21,550 commercial fishing trips that occurred, where 24 different fishing gears were used to harvest 118 unique species, which were landed in 93 New York ports and were reported as being purchased for over $26 million. This reported value does not include catches that were sold privately, so this value could be much larger. Fishing gears. To start off, we're going to dive into some of the fishing gears that were reported as being used for harvest. The background picture on this slide is from the Ocean Beach on Fire Island, and the inset picture is local bluefin tuna that I caught and made sushi with after a fishing trip. So there are two different categories of fishing gear that we recognize. Active gear, where the harvester or fisher is involved in the fishing process the entire time that the gear is in the water. And passive gear, where the gear is left in the water to soak for a period of time, catching animals until the harvester comes back to retrieve the gear. I've included some broad categories of examples of gear from each type for your reference. So the active gears are typically trawl nets, seine nets, dredges, and rod and reel. And our passive gears include gill nets, pots and traps, and trap nets, which are often reported to us as pound nets or fish weirs. The numbers reported on this slide show the total number of fishing trips that occurred for each gear that was used. Of the 24 fishing gears used in 2025, we're now going to explore the top 5 active and passive gears used for harvesting. The top 5 active gears were otter trawls, rod and reel, hand gathering, common seines, and cast nets. And the top 5 passive gears were fish pots, crab traps, whelk pots, lobster pots, and pound nets. So, to look at trawl gear. Here we can see the trawl gear is being used predominantly in Peconic and Gardiner's Bays, which is the area between the Twin Forks on Long Island, and as well as the federal waters off Moriches and Shinnecock Inlet. So Moriches Bay is here, Shinnecock Bay is there, and this is the federal offshore waters. The picture on the right shows a trawl net loaded on the net reel of the research vessel Seawolf. This is a picture that I took during a recent nearshore trawl survey that Stony Brook University was conducting for the New Jersey Department of Environmental Protection. Rod and reel. This slide depicts the rod and reel gear used, and you can see that it's used pretty much everywhere around Long Island, with most trips occurring in Peconic and Gardiner's Bays between the forks, as well as the federal waters off of Moriches and Shinnecock Inlet. But as I said, you can see that it's happening everywhere around Long Island. The picture on the right here is from a recent DEC organized fishing trip from last summer, catching porgies from Long Island Sound, scup from Long Island Sound. Hand gathering. Hand gathering is a method of harvest where a person walks around and picks animals out of the water. This method is being used predominantly to harvest horseshoe crabs from the South Shore bays of Nassau and western Suffolk County, as well as the South Shore waters of Moriches Bay and Shinnecock Bay. We can also see that there is no harvest coming from Gateway National Recreation Area, as well as Great South Bay, which are both closed to the harvest of horseshoe crabs by the federal government. The picture on the right is of our marine invertebrates biologist, Christopher Scott, and the DEC Deputy Commissioner of Natural Resources, Katie Petronis, both holding horseshoe crabs that they hand-gathered during a spawning survey last summer. Common seines are often used to catch smaller species of fish, and you can see here on this map, they're predominantly used in Great South Bay, the southern central portion on the South Shore of Long Island, and Peconic and Gardner's Bays between two forks. Picture on the right is of me, my brother, and my cousin using a 10-foot seine in Jamaica Bay to harvest silver sides last summer. Cast nets. Cast nets are often used to harvest from large schools of bait fish, and we can see that in 2025, our available data shows that they were used in Jamaica Bay, Raritan Bay, and Lower New York Bay. Picture on the right is me throwing a cast net over a school of striped mullet in the St. Johns River in Jacksonville, Florida. Fish pots. Moving on to the passive gears. We're now going to look at fish pot trips. You can see here that this gear is pretty much used everywhere except the Connecticut waters of central and eastern Long Island Sound. The large majority of fish pot trips are occurring in the New York waters of western Long Island Sound, as well as the eastern federal waters. Picture on the right is just to show what a typical commercial fish pot looks like. Crab pot gear. Here we can see crab pots are being set in the South Shore bays from New York City to Shinnecock Bay, with most trips occurring in central South Shore bays and Great South Bay. Typical, on the right, we have a typical crab pot with a bunch of blue crabs in it that were harvested. Whelk pots. Whelk pots are quite primitive and often consist of a milk crate or similar design with a piece of wire or fishing line tied around their inside lip that breaks the suction of whelk as they try to climb up the sides to escape and forces them to fall back into the trap. Most whelk pot trips were occurring between the Twin Forks in the Peconics and Gardner's Bay. And the picture on the right shows a stack of whelk pots being ready to be loaded onto a vessel, and the bags behind them contain whelk that were harvested. Lobster pot gear. Lobster pots were predominantly used in the New York waters of western Long Island Sound, with some trips happening in the federal western waters off the South Shore of Long Island. So the majority of trips happening in western Long Island Sound, and then some trips happening in the federal waters of New York Bight. The picture on the right here is one of my lobster pots that I was fishing on Fire Island Reef with a lobster in the parlor. Pound nets. Pound nets stand perpendicular to the shoreline and force fish to swim along their lengths, where they are often trapped in deep water pens. Almost all of the pound net trips reported happened between the Twin Forks, with some trips also happening in Shinnecock and Moriches Bay. The trips reported in federal waters off here likely happened in Shinnecock, but the reported data was not granular enough to specify the location of these trips. On the right-hand side here, this is a drone photo provided by Christopher Paparo, the fish guide, of a pound net on the east end of Long Island. You can see on the right-hand side here, this is the leader net that would extend from the shoreline. So fish would swim and get trapped by that net. If they swam off this way, they would be in shallower water. If they swim off this way, they end up in deeper water and entrapped in the pounds. Targeted species. So now knowing what gear was used and where, we're going to look at the species that were harvested. Does anybody in the room have any ideas on what some of the top 5 species could have been last year? What?
Squid.
Squid? Any others?
Hake.
Hake?
Bunker.
So we're going to explore this now. This picture is from my personal boat in Hampstead Bay on the south shore of Long Island. And the inset picture is sesame-crusted bluefin tuna from a tuna trip I took last year. So, as you mentioned, the top 5 species, of the 118 unique species that were harvested last year, the top 5 species were longfin squid, scup, Atlantic menhaden, silver hake, and striped bass. As we can see here, the majority of longfin squid harvest occurred in the state and federal waters from Moriches Inlet to Montauk Point, with most of the harvest being landed in the ports of Montauk and Shinnecock. Scup were harvested pretty much everywhere around Long Island, with the majority of the harvest coming from the Peconics, between the Twin Forks, and the federal waters south of Moriches and Shinnecock Inlets. Most of these catches were landed in Shinnecock, Montauk, and Mattatuck. But you can also see that it is not only the east end where these fish were landed. There are many other locations around Long Island that received scup harvest. Nearly all of the Atlantic menhaden harvested last year occurred in Peconic and Gardiner's Bays, with and these catches were mostly landed in East Hampton. We can also see that some harvest came from Jamaica Bay, Raritan Bay, and Lower New York Bay, with these catches most likely being landed in the Bronx. So Jamaica Bay, Raritan Bay, Lower New York Bay, and the borough of the Bronx. Silver hake were harvested from the state and federal waters from Shinnecock Inlet to Montauk Point, and they were mostly landed in Montauk. There were only 4 ports in total that received catches of silver hake. So the state and federal waters from Shinnecock Inlet to Montauk Point, with most harvest being landed in Montauk, the second most in Shinnecock, Mattatuck, and then Greenport. Lastly, the majority of commercial striped bass harvest occurred in the state waters from Shinnecock Inlet to Montauk Point, and they were landed in the ports of Shinnecock, Montauk, East Hampton, and Amagansett. So you can see this darker area here indicating the higher level of striped bass harvest, with Montauk, Shinnecock, East Hampton, and Amagansett receiving the vast majority of those landings. However, harvest also occurred as far west as East Rockaway Inlet, and you can see that there are several ports on the south shore of Long Island that also received striped bass landings in 2025. The harvest locations map does depict harvest coming from the federal waters, but this landings data is preliminary and has not necessarily been verified yet. So, knowing how they were caught, what was caught, and where. Now we're going to pull this all together. This picture is taken in the Fulton Fish Market in the Bronx on an early Thursday morning, probably at 4 o'clock in the morning. It's very busy. And the inset picture is of oysters Rockefeller that I made from Long Island oysters. So this slide is showing the number of unique harvesters, trips, and their total landings from the top 5 species that were landed in 2025. The last 2 columns consist of data gathered from dealer purchase reports, where the dealer reported a purchase price and total dollar amount of the catches they purchased. So the average purchase price and the total dollar amount reported. This information is being provided to summarize everything we have discussed and is just a baseline of the economic value that these species have in New York. Commercial fishing is a huge part of New York's economy and a big industry on Long Island. And with that, I will take questions. This is a picture of a sunset over the New York City skyline from western Long Island Sound, taken off the stern of the research vessel Seawolf, headed back to Port Jefferson. And the inset is hand-gathered hard clams from Great South Bay.